8. That is the number of specific, independently verifiable characteristics Plato recorded in his description of Atlantis, characteristics that can be measured, mapped, and tested against physical reality today. Not general impressions, not poetic flourish. Precise data. A diameter expressed in ancient units of measurement, a geometry of concentric rings, a cardinal orientation, 3 specific colors of building stone, a mountain range to the north, an open agricultural plain to the south, ancient river systems feeding the structure, and a civilization erased by catastrophic flooding in a single generation. 8 independent variables. The probability that all 8 align by pure coincidence with a single geological formation on Earth approaches, by any honest statistical standard, 0. That formation exists. It is visible from space. It is not at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It is sitting in the Sahara Desert, and it has been there the entire time. Subscribe before the first revelation hits. By minute 10, you'll want the entire series. For most of the 20th century, the search for Atlantis was dismissed as the territory of fringe theorists and myth. The mainstream academic position was final. Plato invented the story as a philosophical allegory. The ancient civilization never existed, and serious scholars had better things to investigate. That position has always had a problem. Plato was not writing mythology. His dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, read like a surveyor's report, with precise measurements, architectural specifications, geological observations, and a timeline he attributed to Egyptian priestly records predating him by 9,000 years. Solon, one of Athens' most respected statesmen, carried those records back from Egypt in the 6th century BCE. Plato received them as historical testimony, not legend. When researchers began comparing those specifications against satellite imagery and geological surveys of Northwest Africa, Mauritania, specifically, something unexpected happened. The numbers matched. The geometry matched. The geography matched. And the geology matched in ways that no allegory could have predicted. We are going to walk through each of those correspondences in the sequence Plato recorded them, argument by argument. By the time we reach the last one, the question will no longer be whether Atlantis existed. It will be why it took the modern world this long to look at the right place. The Richat Structure is already the exact diameter Plato described for Atlantis, within a margin of less than 2%. That is not interpretation. That is measurement. Before we examine what that means, we need to dismantle a myth, because the myth is precisely the reason this took so long to reach mainstream attention. Ask most people where Atlantis is, and they will point toward the ocean. A sunken island, a drowned continent, underwater ruins covered in coral and silence. That image comes not from Plato, but from 2,000 years of accumulating embellishment, novelists, theatrical productions, films, and documentary specials with sweeping underwater cinematography. It is a compelling image, and it is almost certainly wrong. What Plato actually wrote is considerably more terrestrial. In Critias, he describes a city built on a low, rounded hill at the center of a flat island, surrounded by a series of concentric rings, alternating bands of land and water, 2 of earth, 3 of water, each one navigable by ship through a network of tunnels and canals cut directly through the rock. He records the outer diameter of the entire structure in stadia, the standard unit of linear measurement in the ancient Greek world. 1 stadion equals approximately 185 meters. His recorded measurement converts to a total outer diameter of roughly 23 kilometers. Stop and translate that into physical reality. The Richat Structure, located on the Adrar Plateau of Mauritania in northwest Africa, is a geological formation large enough to have served as a navigational landmark for orbiting spacecraft. Eroded over millions of years from an ancient domed rock uplift, it presents from above as a set of near-perfect concentric ridges and lower valleys, alternating rings of elevated land and depressed terrain. Those rings mirror Plato's alternating sequence in number and proportion. The outer diameter of the structure, measured by modern satellite survey, is approximately 23.5 kilometers. Plato's recorded measurement, 23 kilometers. Satellite measurement, 23.5 kilometers. Margin of error, less than 2%. That is not a coincidence you can dismiss with a footnote. But it is As already observed, the least specific thing Plato wrote. The geometry deserves a closer look. He does not merely describe concentric rings, he specifies their composition and proportion. 2 of earth, 3 of water. He describes the innermost formation as a raised circular platform housing the royal complex and the central temple. He describes the water rings as navigable channels wide enough to accommodate warships. The Richat Structure's inner formation is a raised circular dome. The surrounding ridges and valleys alternate in exactly the pattern Plato described, and the channels between those ridges, dry now, but geologically mapped, were once water-bearing passages cutting through layers of erodible rock. Not approximately this, exactly tis. And the investigation is only at the beginning. The mathematics do not stop at diameter. They grow more precise and more difficult to explain away when you work through the full set of measurements Plato recorded in Crete. He specifies the width of the outermost ring of water. 3 stadia, approximately 555 meters. He gives the width of the outermost land ring at 2 stadia. He records the depth of the primary canal. He states the total circumference of the outer defensive wall. These are not round numbers chosen for narrative convenience. They are the kind of measurements a builder records in an engineering document, not the kind a poet invents for dramatic effect. When researchers began converting each figure and overlaying the results onto topographic surveys of the Richat Structure, the correspondence extended well beyond diameter. The proportional relationships between the rings, the ratio of land width to water width, fall within margins consistent with the precision available to ancient surveying tools. Consider what that means statistically. If diameter alone matched, you could attribute it to chance. If diameter and ring count matched, you could still argue coincidence. But when the proportional ratios between individual rings also align, when the mathematical relationships internal to the structure correspond across a 23-century-old text and a modern topographic dataset, the coincidence explanation requires you to believe in an improbability that compounds with every additional variable. At 8 variables, each independent, each drawn from a different discipline, that explanation does not survive honest scrutiny. The geometry argues for Mauritania. The geography confirms it. In Timaeus, Plato records Solon's account of what the Egyptian priests preserved. The civilization of Atlantis occupied a landmass with a great mountain range running along its northern edge and a vast open plain extending to the south, the most fertile agricultural land in the known world. Flat and productive, enclosed on 3 sides and open to the sea on the 4th. He places this landmass beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which ancient sources consistently identify with the Strait of Gibraltar. Look at what lies beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. Due south, northwest. Africa, the Atlas mountain range. King Atlas, whose name Plato explicitly invokes, runs precisely along the northern edge of the region, its name unchanged across 3 millennia. Below it, the Saharan plain extends southward for thousands of kilometers flat. Thus, and in Plato's era, not the desert it is today, the Adrara Plateau of Mauritania sits within that plain. The Richat Structure sits on the Adrara Plateau, approximately 200 meters above the surrounding terrain. Mountains to the north, open plain to the south, positioned beyond the Pillars of Hercules. 3 independent geographical variables, the same location. And the irony is considerable. Researchers spent a century mapping the floor of the Atlantic Ocean for a sunken island, while the structure Plato described was sitting above sea level, visible on the first satellite images ever taken of Northwest Africa. It was not hidden. It was hiding in plain sight, which, it turns out, is precisely how this story was always going to end. The stones are where the argument stops being geographical and becomes geological, and where the probability of coincidence effectively reaches 0. In Critias, Plato makes a detail so specific it is almost impossible to read as allegory. He describes the building materials used in the construction of the city. The walls and structures, he writes, were built from 3 kinds of stone quarried directly from the island: white stone, black stone, and red stone. He notes that the builders used these 3 types in alternating patterns throughout the architecture, a deliberate aesthetic choice that made the city visually distinctive. This is not a broad metaphorical gesture. It is a material specification, the kind of detail that only makes sense if someone was recording what they observed. Geologists mapping the Richat Structure documented something in the 1990s and 2000s that had no particular significance at the time. The structure contains 3 distinct lithological formations, 3 layers of rock with different mineral compositions. The first, pale quartzite ridges that appeared distinctly white in survey photographs. The second, dark basaltic intrusions that appear black. The third, ferruginous sandstone saturated with iron oxide that appears unmistakably red, white, black, and red, present in the same geological complex, quarryable from the same site. That demands a complete stop. You are looking at a text composed in Athens around 360 BC. Drawing on a source its author attributes to Egyptian priests recording events 9,000 years earlier. That text specifies 3 colors of building stone 2,500 years later. Geologists conducting independent mineralogical surveys of a formation in Mauritania document exactly those 3 colors in the proportions and accessibility that would make them practical as building materials. The probability that this is coincidence is not small. It is, by any coherent standard, negligible. But the geology does not stop at stone color. It reaches into the climate record, and what the climate record shows is perhaps the most disorienting element of the entire investigation. The Sahara Desert is approximately 5,000 years old. That sentence runs contrary to most people's instinctive image of North Africa, but it is established science. Before roughly 5000 BCE, the region experienced what paleoclimatologists call the African humid period. The Sahara received regular monsoon rainfall. It supported grasslands, lakes, and extensive river systems. Ancient rock art recovered from sites across the Sahara depicts crocodiles, and elephants, animals that require substantial standing water to survive. Animals that have no business being in a desert. One of those ancient river systems has been identified and mapped using subsurface radar imaging. The Tamanrasset River, now buried under meters of sand, once ran through the western Sahara and emptied into the Atlantic Ocean near the coast of Mauritania. Its ancient course has been confirmed by multiple independent remote sensing studies. It passed in close proximity to the Richat Structure. Plato described Atlantis as surrounded by water, fed by rivers, set in a fertile plain capable of sustaining a large civilization. The geological record confirms the Sahara was exactly that kind of landscape during the period when such a civilization would have existed. And then the climate shifted. The rains retreated. The rivers dried or vanished under accumulating sand. The civilization that had built itself around that water supply had nowhere left to go. The desert itself is the evidence, but the most unsettling part is still ahead. Long before satellite imagery revealed the Richat Structure's geometry, an ancient Greek historian placed the people Plato was describing in exactly this part of the world. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE and drawing on some of the same Egyptian and Libyan sources available to Plato, records a people he calls the Atlantes. They live, he specifies, near a great mountain called Atlas in northwest Africa. He places Mount Atlas not as a mythological abstraction, but as a physical landmark in the region, corresponding to modern Mauritania and the Western Sahara. The Moroccan Atlas Range, still bearing that name today, runs along the northern edge of the same region where the Richat Structure stands. Herodotus was not attempting to locate Atlantis. He was recording ethnographic observations about North African peoples. The fact that his placement of the Atlantes and their sacred mountain aligns with the Richat region is not the product of motivated reasoning. It is the result of two ancient sources, writing independently, pointing at the same geography. That is called corroboration. Then there is the question of what ended it. Plato dates the destruction of Atlantis to approximately 9600 BCE, a figure he presents as received historical testimony, not mythological convention. The younger Dryas impact hypothesis, supported by physical evidence from multiple continents, including platinum anomalies and shocked quartz found in sediment layers, dated to approximately 10,800 BC. proposes that a catastrophic extraterrestrial event triggered rapid global climate sea levels rose. River systems that had sustained stable populations for thousands of years either flooded catastrophically or reorganized beyond recovery. In the Sahara, evidence of sudden large-scale water movement is visible in the geological record as alluvial fans, the fan-shaped sediment deposits, left when fast-moving water decelerates across flat terrain. Those deposits are present in the vicinity of the Richat Structure. The water was there. It moved violently, and then it was gone. A civilization built around a river-fed, geometrically engineered city in a fertile Saharan plain would not have been buried under the sea. It would have been buried under sand. And the bones of that city, its circular foundation, its concentric geometry, its quarried stone in 3 colors, would still be there, sitting above the surface, waiting to be recognized for what they are. What separates the Richat structured argument from the long history of Atlantis? Speculation is the nature of the evidence it assembles. Previous theories typically relied on 1 or 2 points of correspondence, a similar name, a rough geographic position, a convenient timeline. The Richat case rests on the convergence of 8 independent variables, each drawn from a different scientific discipline, none of which was developed with the other in mind. The diameter correspondence is a mathematical fact, a conversion from ancient stadia to modern kilometers, verifiable by anyone with a calculator and access to satellite survey data. The ring geometry is a geological fact, documented in topographic studies conducted without reference to Plato. The cardinal geography, mountains north, plain south, position beyond Gibraltar, is a geographical fact, visible on any map. The 3 stone colors are a mineralogical fact, recorded in independent geological surveys. The ancient river systems are a hydrological fact, confirmed by subsurface radar imaging published in peer-reviewed journals. The Green Sahara is a paleoclimatological fact, established by pollen core analysis and faunal evidence across the continent. The Herodotus reference to the Atlantes is a historical fact, recorded in a text predating the modern Atlantis debate by over 2,000 years. And catastrophism, the Younger Dryas event, is a geophysical fact with physical evidence recovered from multiple continents. 8 disciplines, 8 independent lines of evidence, 1 location. What this does not prove, and intellectual honesty requires stating it plainly, is that Atlantis was the civilization Plato described in every cultural and technological detail. No structures have been excavated no inscriptions have been recovered. No artifacts definitively link the site to an advanced prehistorical civilization. What the evidence establishes is a correspondence so dense and so specific that the burden of proof has shifted. The question is no longer why we should consider the Richat structure. The question is what additional evidence would be required to rule it out. If a civilization existed here during the Green Sahara period, building in concentric rings, quarrying local stone in 3 colors, sustained by the Tamanrasset River, and was dispersed by a combination of Younger Dryas flooding and subsequent desertification, what we would expect to find is exactly what we find: a geometric remnant, a geological fingerprint, and a silence in the historical record where the memory of that civilization should be. The silence itself is data. Every variable that can currently be tested points to the same place. 8 variables, and the structure visible from space, sitting exactly where Plato's measurements place it, in a desert that was not always a desert, fed by a river that is no longer a river. The deeper implication here is not about Atlantis. It is about the machinery of how we search. For 2 millennia, we looked for a lost civilization at the bottom of an ocean. We built the search around an image we had constructed: the drowned island, the sunken palace, the romantic ruin beneath the waves, rather than around the text that originated it. Plato's account was precise. Our imagination was not. We replaced his measurements with our preferred story, and then declared the measurements unprovable. The error was not in the evidence. The error was in the question we were willing to ask. What the Richat structure proposes is that the most consequential discoveries of the ancient world may not require submarines or deep-sea excavation equipment. They may require something considerably harder to acquire: the willingness to read a 2,000-year-old document as carefully as we read a legal contract, and to follow the numbers wherever they lead. even when they lead somewhere we did not expect, in a direction that requires revising what we thought we already knew. The Sahara conceals differently from the ocean. It does not hide things in depth. It hides them in scale in formations so vast that from the ground they are invisible, and from space they look exactly like what Plato described. History keeps its biggest secrets in plain sight. Subscribe. We know where to look.